Welcome back, everyone. Just finishing up the fret job on this Larrivee Classical. And you know, it's always an extra challenge to get those last two partial frets in around the curvature of the fingerboard where it meets the sound hole. Now I do put wick, just a drop of super glue in there. And I just kind of sop up the excess. I have the sanding tube that's a much rougher paper. I've wrapped it in 600 cloth back, and I'm just breezing that end. So for the rest of the touch-up, I've got my burn-in knife and some high-heat lacquer stick and some. Use that lacquer stick. Well, you've seen me use this before on the edge of the fingerboard when I'm installing frets to cover up the exposed tang. So with this guitar, it's a little bit different. It's interesting what Larrivee did way back then. There's no actual binding, and there very rarely is on a classical guitar. The actual fret slots stop short of the very edge of the fingerboard, and the crown cantilevers to that outside edge. So doing this fret job was much like you would do on a bound fingerboard. I'll give you a close-up as we get into the job. Right now, you spend more time on these top two partial frets than you do on the next 5 or 6. Get another fresh piece of 600. Obviously nice to have the guitar held in the proper position, right up to like chest level. Great sight lines, and as always, safety first. Okay, that's starting to shape up. Well, the lacquer stick did fill it in, but I am going to hit it with a buffer very lightly. Okay, we smooth that out with a die grinder, and now emery cloth to finish it off. And now we can get on with the rest of the fret job. I'm going to bring you through A to Z on this next fret so you can kind of see what we start with. You see how much longer I've got that? I don't normally do this, but like I said, with that overhang, there's a bunch of extra steps you need to take on each and every fret as you do this type of fret job. I need to cut the tang back to here on both sides. So we'll cut that tang back the full width of the blade on these tang cutters. And now we'll check that against the slot. Still a little too long. We'll bring it back even further. Check it again. Yes, okay. Now I'm just marking where the edge of the fingerboard is on the crown of the fret. Now I got my Lee Valley auger file, and I've taken off the remainder of that extrusion on the underside of the crown. This is why I leave this a little longer than necessary, because I want to grip that with the end cutters and flex it down a little bit on both sides so that that overhang sits tight against the outside of the fingerboard. Now I trim this back. I've got this on a foot switch. Trim this back. And bevel the end. load up that wheel with some jeweler's rouge, polish these fret ends, and now back to the fingerboard. Yeah, we're a little short. And that's why you start with the longer frets and make your way towards the shorter frets. I'm going to move that up to the next fret slot. In this one, the tang is a little bit too long for that next fret slot. So I cut that back. And I did file that with the auger file. And you also have to take into account, this is the fret wire right off the roll, so it has that radius. So when you drive the fret home, it spreads and elongates a little bit. Got my modified end nipper again here where I've blunted the jaws. And I'm crushing the bead. In rosewood it would be fine, but in an ebony board, it's just a little tighter than I like to see. Crush that down a couple of thou. And now we'll send that home. So now we're going back up to that 4th fret that we cut too short. I'm on the home stretch with this fret job. It's almost completely done. As I do these last 2 frets, I thought I would bring you in for a close-up. You can see that the fret slot, actually stops short of the end of the fingerboard. So it means that each and every fret, like you saw earlier, needs to be teed out, and then this is actually overhung and trimmed off on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and put those last 2 frets in, and we'll get that guitar back to the customer. So I pretty well go the full width of that little guillotine blade on both sides. Alright, so I'm checking it against the slot, and that tang is still just a little tiny bit too long. We'll take it back a little more. One more time, so you can see what I went through. This fret job, it's like doing 3 fret jobs. Got my ultra fine Sharpie just marking very close to the final length of the fret. And while I've got something to grab onto, I am flexing. Flex is the operative word here. You don't want to put a kink or a bend in it. Just flexing that back so that that overhang lies tight against the ebony fingerboard when we're all done. So that's been beveled and buffed. Okay, that looks good. One last time, let's check the tolerance on that. As I mentioned before in other videos, you have to remember that you do have to take into account that there is a curvature on that fret. When you drive it home, it spreads, so it's actually a little bit longer than you think. Good. On to the last fret. So we're checking that tang for length again. I really have to take a much bigger bite with these tang cutters than I would normally take on a typical Gibson bound fingerboard like a Les Paul. We're checking that again against the actual slot. Still too long. Yeah, that's a huge amount of overhang. Try that again. That's a good fit. That allows just enough room for that to spread out and elongate a little bit when I drive the fret home. Get my Sharpie to get the length on this thing. And then flex this down. This side as well. And that will do it. I've already taken care of the rest of the frets, so it's just the 1st, 2nd fret we're taking care of now. Our auger file. Cut back those sharp tips. 600 grit. Emery cloth. Well, we are done the fret job. Silky smooth, no snags, no jags. Okay, here's the quick wrap up on this Larrivee Classical. So this customer plays standing up. When he's performing, he's got a strap on. There's a bunch of things that you don't normally do with a classical guitar. First of all, you don't put a system in it, but he goes out and he performs and he needs a system in it. He also wears a strap button. As you've seen in so many other videos, I put a separate strap button so he never uses the input jack for his strap. And here's the placement of the strap button on the heel. And I did actually put a little bit of a radius like I did on that Koa Martin so the thing doesn't rotate and sits flush against the mahogany. Another thing that you don't normally see is side position markers. So I installed these little pearl dots for the 5th position, 7th position, and 9th position. Of course, a new set of D'Addario Pro Art high tension strings, D'Addario Blues. So the customer has this incredible flamenco strum, and that's what he does most of the time. I am going to talk to him about a Herco tap plate. We'll probably end up putting that on, otherwise he'll chew through the top. And that wraps it up for the Larrivee Classical. So this is the K&K system designed for classical guitars that has 4 of those little stethoscopes that go underneath the soundboard under the bridge. Right into my lab series, no preamp, so it's just dry. Whatever system you've got, you know, you're going to end up EQing to thin it out or thicken it up or get more top end or more bottom end. There's a little bit of reverb on there. Let me take that off. This is dry. And that is basically it. The complete refret is done. There's a little bit of fingerboard correction on this one as well. That system is installed, and I know the customer is anxious to get this back. Thanks for tuning in.